Brenda, thank you so much for being on my show. How are you today?
I am wonderful. It is actually 9:30 at night my time. So it's a little late. Yeah,
Oh,
but I'm having a great day so far, so all good.
let's keep it that way. Story is inspiring. You went from being a copywriter to write books for kids, and your latest novel is called It's Okay Not to Know. Was there a specific moment or observation that sparked the idea to write the book?
Thanks for asking. What happened was I was visiting my sister and she has a little boy. And so my nephew at the time, he was probably 8 or 9, and he was helping me put away the leftovers after dinner. So he put everything in a little plastic container and he didn't have the lid on tightly enough. So he accidentally dropped the container as he was on his way to the refrigerator, and food was everywhere. It was all over the ground, it was on the cabinets, it was on the walls. He just looked at the mess. And the first thing he said was, "Oh man, I'm so stupid." And he just instantly just shut down and started to feel so bad about himself, like he wasn't enough. And that reaction just hurt my heart. Because instead of just, oops, I was like, okay, why don't we just clean up and learn? It just became a very difficult situation for him. It's almost as if it solidified what he believed in himself, which was, look at this, you're so stupid. You can't do anything right. And he's not raised that way. So I was wondering, how did he get that? I'm a copywriter by trade. I still work with other clients and everything else. The book, It's Okay Not to Know, I wrote because of this. It's also another project of mine on the side. The reason I wrote the book is, as a copywriter, we like to analyze humans. We naturally are very inquisitive, try to figure out the why behind why people do or think the way they do. So that's just how I'm wired to automatically think that way. I started wondering, why did he react that way? Instead of how another kid might be, well, it's okay, I made a mistake, let's just help clean this up. So I started thinking back about how when kids, at least in the US where I am, top marks, at times the parents put that paper on the refrigerator, say, "Oh, you're so smart. Look at you." And they never put a low grade on the refrigerator. The way we do our markings, I'm not sure how you guys do it elsewhere, is we have A, B, and C grade. So A being the best, B being a failure. And then you never see anyone put a B or C paper usually on the refrigerator. It's usually the A. And then they would always follow it up with so smart. Then if you have a really good certificate or something like that, you want an award, they put that up too. They talk about how you're so good at sports, you're so this, you're so that. But it's always you're being rewarded for what you achieve, not so much for how hard you worked or for your effort. What that does is I started wondering, how does that really affect your mindset? And there's work by a very famous psychiatrist from Stanford University. Her name is Carol Dweck. Have you heard of that growth mindset in some of her work she's done with children? And then so what she's done, she's actually studied this, and she's learned that there's a difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And the growth mindset is usually is, I don't know how to do something yet, but I will figure it out. The fixed mindset is, this is who I am, this is as good as it's going to get, and this is all I'm going to know. And then when you tell a child, you're so smart, duh. But then when they come to a challenge and they can't figure it out, their label to themselves is, I'm supposed to be smart. If I can't figure this out, then that means I'm not so smart. And that's not going to work for me. So I'm just not going to try. Or I'm going to pretend I tried, but not really. Or I'm going to cheat or I'm going to lie. And they're not bad kids. They're just trying to figure out a way to protect themselves to keep with that label that given them. And we're well meaning as adults, thinking we're praising them, but what we're really doing is limiting them. And what Carol Dweck found in her research, she did this test where she had two different groups of kids. And randomly, she would give some of the kids a test, and they all had the same test. And then randomly, what she would do is based off of the results, she would just say, okay, you guys, you did such a good job trying. You are really good at figuring out difficult problems. You tried so well. Then the other group, she would say, wow, you guys are so smart. You are really smart. You did a great job on the test. The kids didn't know how well they did. They just know the praise that they got at the end. When she tested them again, the second time, she gave them an even harder test. The kids that were given the test and the response earlier, they think that they're in that group of, oh, you're so smart. Those guys didn't try as hard because the test was so hard that they didn't know what to do. So they just gave up. The other group, though, the group that believed that they're really good at trying, they did really well on that test. It's just they were willing to try. So that's the difference between the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. And we're teaching our kids that fixed mindset by how we react to certain things and how we expect certain things from them. So when I started thinking about that, one morning I just woke up and I decided I need to write this book. I really believe I channeled it because it was in the back of my head so much. And I just felt like there are so many out there who grow up with this fixed mindset. And as adults, you've met them. They're the ones who, if you try to explain something to them or if you question anything, they get very defensive. They just go, oh, I already know that. You can't tell me what to do. And da, 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 right? They start getting that way. And it's because I believe it's in their subconscious, they think, if you're telling me that I'm wrong, that means you're telling me I'm not good enough, or not smart enough, not whatever enough. They have that wounding inside that hasn't been dealt with. And then so I come from right now, I live in Washington State. That is considered like the emerald forest of the Silicon Valley of Washington, right? It's where a lot of tech is happening over there, a lot of engineering. You got Google, you got Microsoft, you got Boeing and everything. And we come from a culture in that area, in my area, which is all fail fast and fix things, right? It all came from Meta. Facebook started this a long time ago, who's now Meta. It was like fail fast. And so anybody who's in tech is always thinking that way. And even if you create a corporate culture that allows you to feel supposedly safe failing, if you subconsciously have that mindset that if you fail, that means you're not enough, something's wrong with you, you're not going to push yourself as much as you could. You're not going to live your biggest life. You're not going to take risks as much as you normally would because you're still feeling held back. So I wrote this book to help kids grow up, figuring out how to overcome their challenges by being curious, by asking questions like, how can I? Instead of instantly shutting down and think, I can't do that. And so I call it Brene Brown meets Dr. Seuss. It's a really easy book to read. Little kids automatically gravitate towards it when they read it. They get it. The teachers, the parents, the people I hear the feedback from, they go, it's great because we can have these conversations with these kids and they get it, right? I'm helping them get these tools so that way they can grow up and know it's okay not to know. Now, how can we find out? And it's teaching them to be more self-loving and compassionate when they can't figure something out. And when they're more self-loving towards themselves, then later they can be more loving towards others and help someone else figure something out. And that's also represented in the book too. So I'm really teaching self-love through as well. And also to help uplift the community around these kids by teaching them to love others as well.
The theme of embracing mistakes and a growth mindset is central to your book. And it's obvious we need to introduce it at an early age because the older you are, apparently it's harder to change. So for those that are listening right now and have kids, could you share your thoughts to parents or educators? How can they reinforce this mindset in everyday interactions of children?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, based off of what I've read so far, and I am not a psychologist, so I know there are people who are a lot more qualified than I am to be able to teach this. However, I would say the best thing to do is to first model it yourself as an adult, because you can say one thing to a kid and do something completely different, and the kid's going to notice that, right? They're observant, they're smart. So be consistent in that way. And then the other thing is to make sure that you try to, when you're talking to a child, instead of rewarding them for what they've done, reward them for how hard they've tried. Ask them what they've learned from it. Ask them about, how did you feel when you went through that and didn't know what to do? And then have those conversations. Yes, it takes more time, And I know a lot of parents, we're just so busy because we're trying to do so much. We're working, we're doing everything else. And spending those extra few minutes seems like too difficult to do. But when we slow down enough and we do it, then we allow those kids to create the social, emotional learning skills in order to be able to work through their problems on their own and believe they have the capability to do. Because it's easy for us to say, wow, okay, you did that wrong, or you should have tried harder, but that doesn't help. So instead, we can ask them questions. And what I love for more parents to do, instead of saying, what did you do really well today, is sit at the dinner table every single night and ask, what did you fail at today? And reward them for that, because that means they stretched themselves a little bit. If they tried hard, not because they just called it in, but they really tried hard. I tried this really difficult thing at school during PE and I couldn't kick the ball hard enough, but I really tried. Then I was like, good for you. Keep going at it then. And then you keep learning and you get better. But what did you fail at today? What did you learn that? And what do you want to fail at tomorrow? This is exciting because we see failure culturally at most places as a bad thing. That if you do it in a way to see how you can expand and grow, failure is actually something I think we should all do more of. And then relabel our brains around it and not think it's a bad thing. It's actually, how can we stretch ourselves? How can we expand? Because it's all about expansion in our lives, right? If we don't expand, that's why you're doing this podcast, is so you can expand yourself as well. Because we have so much to give. Everybody has so much to give this world. But we can't give it if we play small and if we don't believe in ourselves and if we're too scared to take risks and if we're too scared to get out of our little bubble. So that's my really long answer for that one.
I also do believe in value of failure. And if you fail head fast, and myself included, I don't write my weekly wins. I don't see value in it just to cultivate my self image that, oh, I'm this great person and all of that. I don't think there's any value in it whatsoever. I think people who do that actually have some issues with self esteem and not being enough. What I like to do each week is write down my failures and
Oh,
see
cool.
what the lesson is from that. And it helps me to grow really a lot because failure means that you made some mistake that you can learn from. And that
Mhm.
learning will have so much value in your life. But obviously, it also starts with self compassion. Your character in the book, called Bink, is curious and treats himself with compassion. Do you have any more advices for parents or educators to help the children develop their self compassion in a world that is focused on perfection, is focused on things that are artificial and not real?
Yeah, that's a tough one, huh? Because it's so true. Because every signal they get from everywhere, it's all about being perfect in so many ways. And I think self love comes from how you talk to yourself. And to help kids and parents and adults need to hear this too, because we are so used to always saying, oh man, that was stupid. Oh man, I'm getting so old. I can't remember anything. And they just, those comments that we make all day long, we're just pushing ourselves down. We insult ourselves all day long, most of people, and they don't hear it. Right. I had to consciously stop that when I think it was in my 30s before I figured out I was doing that because it's so prevalent. Everyone else does it too. So I started to say, okay, wait, I wouldn't talk to a little kid that way. Why would I talk to myself that way? That's not self love. So the first thing is to hear ourselves and hear the words we say to ourselves and be uber conscious about it and be really quick to always be as supportive to ourselves as possible. When we mess up, yeah, we own it. We own the fact that I was like, okay, you messed up over there. That's okay. You messed up. What can we do about that now? Because it's not like we're always going to praise ourselves when we don't deserve praise. But at the same time, we're not going to say, oh, you're so fat, you're so skinny, you're so stupid, you're so tall, you're too short. We're not going to do that kind of stuff to ourselves. And we shouldn't let kids do that to themselves either. One
So,
example, I have a friend who her son was having trouble learning to tie his shoes, and everyone else at school had already figured it out. And he was so hard on himself. He would go home every single day after school and try to learn it. And then the more he tried to learn, the more frustrated he would get. And then he would feel worse about himself, thinking he was slower than everyone. He was dumber than everyone. and something was wrong with him because he couldn't figure out how to tie his shoes when everyone else did. That's a perfect example for any caregiver to sit there and go, oh, no, it's okay. Your brain just works differently than everyone else's. Let's just try this way. Let's just try that way. Let's just figure out how we can do it together instead of letting them go, I'm so dumb. Everyone else is doing it. And they feel that pressure on themselves. Those are the kind of moments as well is when we have to make sure we stop it. We hugging them and telling them that they're smart can only go so far. It's teaching them the skills to be able to lift themselves out of the situation, to get out of that frustration, to step back, take that breath and go, okay, maybe the way we were taught at school doesn't work for us. Let's try a different way of learning. And that's part of that compassion too.
As you mentioned, when we grow up, many adults struggle with the same issues of self doubt or fear of making mistakes. Do you think the learnings from the book could apply to the older audience?
No, I definitely think so. This is a Trojan horse in many ways, because my hope is that when the adults are reading it to the kids, it reminds the adults to practice it themselves. What I'm saying in the book is not anything new. Everyone's heard the story before and the lesson before. I'm just saying it in a different way. And hopefully in this way, it'll sink in, right?
Mm.
Because you know how it is. We all have to hear it and we're ready to absorb it when we're ready to absorb it. But we sometimes need to hear the same message spoken to us different ways before it finally sinks in. So this is just another tool to help.
The seed needs to be planted to the soil before it can grow to a beautiful tree. And it
Mhm.
takes time, obviously. The more time you give yourself, the less time the process will take. But
Mhm.
I'm curious, is there any other way you envision parents using your book? It's okay not to know as a tool for fostering meaningful conversation with the kids.
Yes, I can figure in any situation with school at home, what I've heard before from other teachers as well as parents is they said, what's great is when we start looking at the book and we ask the child, no matter how old they are, you just go, what do you think they're feeling there? What do you think's going on there? We get into the feelings of it, right? And that's a great way of using the book as a learning tool to help kids develop
Mm.
those. I call it social emotional learning skills because that's the category, SEL, that people are talking about these days. And that's really what this is. It's teaching them the skills to handle their emotions, to recognize their emotions. So stop when you're looking at the page, ask a question. What do you think the character thinks going through? Oh, look, Bink couldn't catch the ball. Have you had a situation where you couldn't catch the ball or you couldn't do something as good as someone else? How did you feel then? What could you do differently? That kind of thing. And just start asking more questions and helping them work it through.
Do you believe there's ever a time when it's not okay not to know something, especially in the faith-based world that we're living right now? And how do you reconcile that with the message in your book?
It's not okay to know something. Or do you have an example in mind? Is it okay to not know something? Like you should always know. I think being the human experience the way it is, there are going to be times where you wish you knew something, like don't walk down that alley in the dark by yourself, that kind of thing. But as just like a part of being human is not knowing so much if you're constantly expanding, right? And I'm saying it's not like you want to stay in this constant situation of not knowing anything because you're constantly learning. You want to learn from your supposed mistakes. You want to, everything is all learning so that you can keep growing and expanding, believing in yourself, take more risks, get bigger. That's my whole goal for people is so they can live their biggest lives. So if you're constantly learning from your situation, then you're always going to be expanding. If you're always expanding, you're always going to be in some situation where you don't know something. Because there's a saying my father used to say, the more you know, the less, because the
Mm.
more questions you always have. And it's true. If you're in expansion mode, always got more questions. You always wonder, oh, I wonder what would happen if I do this or let's start this. We look at Sir Richard Branson, he was the founder of Virgin. And if you look at his to-do list, one of them at one point was, I read somewhere where it was buy an island, start a railroad, buy an airplane, start an airline, all that kind of stuff. Big things. And would you ask him, have you ever done it before? No, but I'll figure it out. And because he knows, believes in himself enough And yeah, it's a healthy amount of ego, which is great, but it's believing yourself enough, know that the resources are out there, know the universe will provide. You just got to get yourself in the groove of saying, okay, this is what I want. I think it'll be really fun if we try this. Let's see what's going to happen. And you stay in that curious, joyful, loving mode. And that's the most important. You don't want to be in that fearful mode of, oh, I'm going to fail. I don't know why I'm going to try it, but I'll try it anyway. But if you start from that perspective, yeah, you're going to have a very difficult time.
How do you personally stay curious and compassionate in your own life? And how has this influenced your writing?
You ask wonderful questions. So this has helped remind me to be more self-compassionate and then also to be more patient with others. I am a very, what we call a type A personality, right? I'm like, go get everything done now. Do it yesterday. That's my natural vibe. That is how I'm wired naturally. What this helps me do is it helps me take a step back long enough to go, okay, was I being kind to myself here? Did I take on too much and not give myself enough of a break? That's part of loving yourself too, is to know it's okay to take a break, right? It's also if I get impatient with somebody else or I start feeling myself getting impatient because something's not happening as fast as I think it should be. Not necessarily because I'm right, but that's just because how I expect things to move. Then I am learning to just step back and go, wait a minute, am I being fair to that person? Right? Is everything going the way it should be? And so it
Mm.
helps me be a lot more patient and open to asking other people questions instead of also assuming I know what's going on. Because the old me would have gone years and years ago if someone didn't do something on time, let's say on a project, right? They didn't turn in their project on time. I would instantly think, oh my gosh, they're so disorganized, or are they just lazy? Or what is it? Do they just not care? It's all this negative stuff of blame. Instead, now I stop and ask questions. Okay, you couldn't do it on time. Well, what happened? What could I have done to help? Was the direction not clear enough? What could we have done differently? So I start trying to help figure out the problem. Yeah, because I learn from it as well as they do. So it's taking that time.
Was there any mistake or a moment from your own life that turned out to be a valuable learning experience? And how did it shape who you are right now?
I have a billion learning experiences. They never stop. I can't imagine. I have a hard time pinpointing just one. I would say, as a collective, it was being raised with immigrant parents in the US. At the time that I was here, when as a child, even though I was born in the US, I didn't speak English as a first language. And then so I went to school, not realizing kids in American typical white schools do not speak Chinese. So I didn't know what was going on. And learning that I was very different from others and learning not to feel that I'm less than because of that. Because I grew up in a time when being different was not right. Being non-white was bad. So I was treated very poorly. So so was my family. And so we were taught to feel like should be ashamed of ourselves because we weren't white and looked like everybody else. And it took years of me going through what I had to go through to figure out, wait a minute, I'm perfect the way I am. I love me the way I finally got to the point where I am very happy with who I am, and I'm glad for it. I don't have that shame in the back of my head where I have to constantly prove to somebody that I'm worth this or I'm worth that. Where I see a lot of people still do that, whether they're from ethnic background or not. But as a collective, I believe that's what's really molded me is to
Mm.
that growth I had going through that.
Yeah, I believe that God doesn't make mistakes, neither does nature. So it means we all are here for a reason. And sometimes it means we need to forget who we think we are to allow what we truly are to shine through. But changing the topics, your character in the book, Bink, if he could have one superpower to help him through the moments, what do you think it would be and why?
I would still say compassion because everything to me I believe everything stems from love. When you love yourself, when you love others, you don't have the judgment. You don't have the hatred, the fear, the this or this and that. You can work things through love. You have more of the patience, you have more of the generosity, you have more everything that you need to get through difficult situations. And Bink, I know you keep mentioning that Bink actually has no gender. And I purposely created the character this way and also the illustrations of the book, the way they are of this fictitious monster world. Because when I was growing up, okay, so I'm in my 50s. So when I grew up in the US, it wasn't in the 1970s. And there was no book out there that had any characters in it that was not white. And then so I always felt like, oh, there's something wrong. I don't look like them, but I'm supposed to act like them. So they added to the whole not enoughness. You don't belong here, that type of feeling subconsciously. And then I created Bink in world. So that way, every child, no matter what their background, no matter what their belief system, no matter what they physically look like or how they feel like or anything, they can relate to the character because I wanted to be as inclusive as possible. As far as I know, the word Bink, the sound, can be made by any child who can speak in any language. And that's another reason why the character's title name is Bink as well, because I wanted to be, again, just as inclusive as possible.
Understand? I hear you. What about if you could give just one advice to parents that may struggle with encouraging their children to embrace unknown and learn from mistakes?
I would say start with yourself and try it together because you can't teach what you don't know and you can't fake it because the kid will know and you're not going to get the results that you're hoping. So the best way to try to teach a child is to start with yourself and maybe make a game of it where you do it together. Like you do some type of exercise together. It's, okay, today we're going to say positive things to ourselves. Today we're going to have a challenge and we're going to talk about it and what we learned from it and how hard it was or whatever you want to do. If it helps to do it together, that's great. And then that way they can see mommy or daddy is trying to figure it out as well. But definitely start with yourself before you can ever do it with anyone else, whether it's a peer or with a child.
You give what you don't have, as in you cannot pour from an empty cup. So
Mhm.
always start change from within. I like that message. What about you though? Are there any future projects or books you're working on that to continue to explore this social, emotional learning themes?
Yes. Thanks for asking. And I do plan to have more books coming down. So I figured it'll come when it comes. In the meantime, I'm fully focused on getting this book out there as much as possible. Getting thinking the story, the message of love and upliftment, starting with yourself. And that way you can uplift the community around you. Because our world can use a lot more of that, I believe.
Where can the listeners find your book and how can they connect with you or follow your work?
They can go to my website, brendado.com, and that's BRENDADO.com. And there they can see my feed. They can also look at the book, get to know it some more. They can email me, anything.
Amazing. All of those links are underneath this video. So be sure to show Brenda some love. Thank you, Brenda, for joining and stay tuned for another episode of Pure Bliss called The Golden Llama Show.